Ted, before the break, you were just describing the dynamics of relying on, let's say, the oil and gas industry and what this means for those opportunities moving forward. What are some of those opportunities, if not oil and gas? What drives economic growth in Canada?
Well, we are going to be seeing an energy rotation. So for the same reason that perhaps oil and gas is sort of lesser up there, but we're going to be moving towards battery technologies, changes in the automotive sector. There's been some major investments in the auto sector in central Canada that perhaps will lead to potentials for related companies and suppliers and so on in that area. So certainly the new ways of doing business. COVID taught us how the office works and how people can work far more remotely. So that's bringing changes and opportunities to the way that businesses can offer there. So change will always bring some potential new investment potentials for Canadian businesses, and our hope is that's going to be there. Our expectation is that business investment is going to grow reasonably well, well above that of just before the pandemic. But there's still risks in that kind of forecast, and certainly higher rates is going to dampen that a little bit. But so far the movement, even though it looks large just in the space of 1 week, is relatively mild in the scheme of things.
And on that note, I mean, you talked about the prospects for growth. Do you see we had a previous guest talk about a recession, stating that it's not a question of if, but when. Do you feel that a recession is on the horizon, or do some of those growth prospects give you reason to be optimistic?
I think the notion is that it's probably a 50-50 proposition, but remember, a recession or not recession is not a binary or a yes/no kind of question, because you can have very slow growth for a number of years and end up at a worse point than if you have a short, sharp recession and then reasonably good growth after that. So the hope is that if there's a bit of a resetting phase that the economy has to go through, and we've long forecast that kind of thing. It's just happening a little faster than we had expected earlier on. It's the kind of reset that's really required, and getting the housing market back into reasonable territory where it's more affordable or prices are kept in check. The inflation expectations of housing has to be kept level, and then also bring down the inflationary expectations of the general public so that we can get back to the 2% bound that the bank has traditionally rested on. That should set up the economy much better in the longer term.
So, I mean, when you talk about the economy in the longer term, I want to just ask you a question about, over the period of the pandemic, the Canadian Federation for Independent Businesses had regularly reported that many small businesses took on a considerable amount of debt. How hard is this rate increase going to hit those independent businesses, those local stores who maybe took on a lot of debt to survive at low interest rates? Is there a prospect of foreclosure in those instances, or are they still going to be able to dig out of that hole?
It's a good question. A lot of small firms were having to go into debt in traditional sort of lending vehicles. There was also the government-sponsored lending program, that the business account program that allowed them to get a certain amount of money. I believe it was $60,000 in loans, and some of that was forgivable. So there has been some benefit along those lines. In that particular loan, I believe interest rates are capped until a period of time, through the end of next year, I believe, or the year after that. So there is some protection on the businesses that took part in these particular programs, but those who borrowed beyond that, perhaps they had to retool, they had to change their business processes and so on. If it was done outside that particular government program, yes, they would be facing higher interest rates for that lending. So the expectation, though, is that we've seen so far relatively mild bankruptcy numbers. coming out. And the other is that the number of businesses, according to StatCan, that are operating is more or less back to the pre-pandemic levels. So, there are now, that could be that there are a lot of brand new businesses that have reset according to the sort of the new economic conditions, and that others have fallen by the wayside. But by and large, the broad numbers look more or less the same as we had seen before the pandemic.